Welcome back, everyone. Today I wanted to give my immeasurably complex review of Darktide after 6 months of playing and making videos for it. It's been a wild ride, and recently there was a trailer from the Warhammer Skulls Fest called Rejects Unite. This is the relaunch of the game and the Make It or Break It update to try and cover up its troubled past. In the trailer, they try to give a little bit more of a timeline of what they did well to try and capture a new audience and get people to come back. Unfortunately, this wasn't the full story. Darktide wasn't meant to be a one-off game. It was meant to be an entire standalone powerhouse in its own right that teased a world created by Dan Abnett. They would also snowball off of that with tons of merchandise for your next favorite Warhammer game, and even have action figures that came painted or unpainted if you wanted to do it yourself, and even boasted itself as a live service game that would receive constant updates to make even more money off regular releases and skins. This was not just supposed to be the biggest game Fat Shark ever released, but one of the biggest titles of 2022. And even though it was marketed well, it came at a very heavy cost, which is why this isn't just a review, but a full timeline breakdown to understand how we got here. I also did a live stream that dives deeper into each one of these points and canceled features that took about 3 hours to go through, and that VOD's linked in the description for you, because I really want to show you not only the truth about what Darktide was supposed to be, but the secrets about its past. So I'm going to light this off with the very beginning and its 3 troubled launch delays that would push it from 2021 to November 30th, 2023, showing its internal struggles with development very early on. But in this time frame, they would announce a very well-respected writer, Dan Abnett, to drive a ton of hype over Darktide's story. This ended up leaving players extremely disappointed at launch and mostly confused with some very weird cutscenes. I will say Darktide has a great backstory about Antoma Prime and the Hive City we're fighting in, but it is not a story-driven game at all like it was marketed to be. But as we continue in the delayed arc, there would be multiple dev streams that would tease Darktide features and how it would be a live service delivering content at a constant pace. This thread, along with the streams, are linked in the description for you, and it drove a ton of hype between a fully customizable weapon attachment system and contracts to earn weapons through a progression system. They would never end up making it into the game. But as we continue, we get to the closed beta test and more teasers of how classes would be released every quarter, which was also canceled due to the botched launch. But something within this post would be very foreboding in the near future. And after we saw that pre-order early access go live November 17th, 2022, with the recommended requirements to play, and an entire dev update talking about performance, which really didn't go over that well. This was not an early access beta by any means as much as they pretended it was, but the pay to get an early launch of the game, similar to how play early works for something like Diablo 4 and a lot of other games, but this would be an age of strife for Darktide, and we will call it the Shillening. The game was in such a horrendous state between the crashing and performance problems that they couldn't ignore it for very long, and had to add an early access beta tag to try and curve some animosity towards Darktide while staying completely silent about it. After this, they posted how crafting would be done, which wouldn't actually get fully implemented for 4 more months, and I go over the irony of this post a little later on. But for now, we get to November 30th, the big day, the full launch of Warhammer 40k Darktide, unlocking 3 maps and a ton of fixes that would be removed and re-added several times over the course of the next 6 months. But Fat Shark made a massive blunder that would kill their entire brand and trust they built in their community over the years, with a day one cash shop that you couldn't purchase the exact amount of in-game currency to buy a skin with. This was made even worse by an interview with PC Gamer called "They Don't Want to Be Predatory." Game director Anders broke this down and made people even more mad about it with a "whoopsie, we forgot to add the one-to-one bundles haha" post after the overwhelming backlash already happened. This was changed weeks later to allow you to buy things normally, and then the cash shop was ultimately removed with the apology letter. And usually people are fine with cosmetics, but after players were ignored for 2 weeks to get the same broken game with more performance issues than a Tesla truck window, we also got hit with the game isn't finished and a coming soon feature on the crafting that wasn't ready in time. And the only way to get decent weapons was to shop camp an hourly reset that had a very limited amount of items on it, causing even more frustration with an arbitrary system that was pure RNG, focusing only on trying to inflate as much playtime as possible, and this would be the general direction of Darktide for the foreseeable future. Crashing also got quite a bit worse on launch day and couldn't rejoin the games that they were crashing out of because that was removed by accident. And just when you think it couldn't get any worse, we learned that the people on Game Pass couldn't play with the people on Steam. This is still an issue that persists with the Rejects Unite update, so obviously the reviews went to mostly negative, and it was very deserved for launching an unfinished, completely broken game. It was only by their first update on December 15th that they managed to fix most of the crashing issues, but 4 full weeks of a broken game had caused enough damage to make most people quit altogether. This was also their first content drop that would add a map and completely change the Bolter's animation set and add duo queue. This would be the first instance of Fat Shark showing how player-centric they were, but only prioritizing things that did not matter at all, and ignoring key problems that would very quickly diminish the player base even further in the near future, with a brand new broken game mode called Hunting Grounds. Now, from the CBT, most people were happy with the doggos that they had there, but some small amount of feedback again made them rework the doggos to a point that they were so broken, it resulted in a space program. This update was followed by a 3-week vacation, and over the course of this Christmas break, they left this broken game mode on relentlessly the entire time, showing the true state that the game was in, and a horrible buggy mess with doggos flying everywhere. This was also the beginning of FOMO Gacha Crafting, with the Refine feature being unlocked, and lets you keep clicking a button randomly to get something from this list. I try not to do this very often, but I can speak for the majority of the player base on this one that you should just be able to choose a perk from a list. Almost everybody agrees on that. Randomly clicking through this is a nightmare, and is literally the definition of a random, repetitive, not fun to do action that we were told we weren't going to get. So when we fast forward 3 weeks into the future and Fat Shark begins to return to the office, only to see a mass exodus with 90% of their peak player base leaving, this made them turn off the first terrible iteration of endless doggos that would later be completely reworked, and some weird Vox transmission that would try to tease new content that was very poorly received, and also prompted a surprise survey for players that was not announced on any official media or their Discord and was only ever shown on the in-game launcher. This caused even more drama, and the answers changed based on what you chose. In the video I have of it, I chose all of the things that made the most sense, which were all of the worst things. This was also very rushed and had a couple issues inside of it, but it was also the first step of Fat Shark listening to real feedback that the majority of people wanted, instead of some random garbage that ruined the game. After this survey, all current plans for the game were completely scrapped, and they started to actually work on finishing it. And then we got an apology letter that didn't apologize for anything. It also earned a solid C tier on Asmongold's apology tier list. After this, we started getting a normal amount of communication through comms links, which are basically just update teasers from their newly hired community manager, Fat Shark Catrfish, who tries to answer some questions to help deal with the fallout of every single update. This was genuinely appreciated by a lot of people, including myself, and was the first good thing to happen since launch. This also started balance patches between content updates to help fix everything that was broken, which takes us into the 3rd month of Darktide on February 22nd, where they made weapons more accessible by letting you buy the first stage of them from Brunt's Armory. This removed the RNG and reliance on the hourly shop, and crafting would finally be fully implemented on Hadron, allowing you to swap blessings by destroying weapons and putting their blessings into a library to transfer onto other weapons of the same type. The original system for this would have let you put blessings on any weapon, but that was also scrapped to become a shell of what it could have been. To quickly explain Darktide's crafting system, would compare it to a gacha game experience with a Chinese-Korean MMO twist of being able to eat an infinite amount of your time, but with no pity system. Its random upgrading is very punishing and starts with buying weapons from the vendor to try and get a gray item with decent modifiers. All of these roll between 1 and 80. Then you start upgrading. Tier 1 green gets you a perk randomly chosen from this list. Tier 2 gets you a blessing randomly chosen from a list of whatever blessings that weapon can have. Tier 3 purple gets you a second perk, and Tier 4 legendary gets you a second blessing. You can reroll one perk and change one blessing, and that locks the other one from being changed at all. Perks were already there, and you still have to spam click randomly to get what you want. It's just tedious and boring. This is also where an insane amount of FOMO came into the game, where god rolling became prominent to try and get the best items possible. So with some gimmicks, you could min-max your materials and hopefully your mental state. This system still hasn't changed, and there's been no acknowledgement that it is a problem at all from Fat Shark, even though it is the main cause of frustration right now and the reason people quit. To put this into perspective, I personally don't have some of the rarest blessings blessings, and I have almost 200 VODs of Damnation games uploaded on my alt channel. Some blessings are super rare and hard to obtain with tons of time invested, and forces even no-life players to rely on Mr. Milker Shop for blessings. This is a daily reset with purple and legendary items that you can only buy with tokens from weekly quests, and is part of a shop camping meta that is also completely random. All of this tied together into crafting creates a very heavy FOMO to chase after the best possible weapons because they're the most fun to use. They can double, even triple a weapon's power, and with the right setup can trivialize and one-shot even the hardest enemies. The weird part is you don't have to craft a god rolled weapon to do any of the content in Darktide. You just need something good enough. Most of the Damnation games were being completed with grays, greens, and blues because that's all we had in December. But good legendaries just became very accessible, lowering the overall skill ceiling, which is a good and bad thing at the same time. But if you've ever played a gacha game, you kind of know where this one goes. When you see people having fun with crazy cool weapons, it makes you want them too, but they can be so hard to obtain it creates a toxic gameplay loop. So hopefully this helps you see why one of the pinnacle systems of Darktide is the main reason people quit and never look back. But this update at the time was viewed very positively and also reworked the hunting grounds condition that everybody hated and turned it into something fun for a couple of weeks that even I thought was pretty good. But somewhere down the line in a patch, they removed the changes that they made to doggos by accident and completely broke the game mode. It was also reworked again in the Rejects Unite update. The next couple of patches would also break and fix an equal amount of things at the same time. Every 2 steps forward really was 1 step back until March 23rd, the Tools of War update. This went live adding a couple of weapons to finally hit the cap that they promised at launch, and this was a really well received update. Overall happiness levels were up, and L Shark turned into W Shark, which made people start saying swap your reviews to positive for about a whole 2 weeks, only to have their hopes turned to dust with patch number 7. And after so many good updates in a row, they finally showed what they think is retaining players. And instead of listening to real feedback for more good changes, they nerfed the power sword. Now, if you don't know anything about Warhammer 40k, this is essentially a plot armor removal tool and is one of the flat-out strongest melee weapons in its entire galaxy. And in-game, it was obviously really strong because it was very easy to use and did everything in melee the best. I will say this was unhealthy for the game, but it was broken because of an exploit that with enough mobs and good gameplay basically lets you swing its charged attack forever. This obviously needed to be fixed and the weapon needed a complete rework. But instead of a rework, it was just nerfed and accidentally fixed what was broken about it. This made the weapon need, a very rare blessing that only a small amount of people had that has a very low chance of being obtained, to let you do what the weapon did as a baseline before. And if you've ever seen a gacha game character get nerfed, you know exactly what happened next. But it was a lot worse than just a normal nerf because it promoted diving deeper into a horrendous RNG crafting system that players were already leaving the game over. But just to clarify this, because I know some of these top players from the 10-man Discord servers are writing their 3-paragraph essays for me right now, like some sort of Call of Duty my dad can beat up your dad on Game Paddles nonsense. Balance is a good thing, and fixing broken things is good. Arbitrary nerfs with no direction or goal in mind other than playtime inflation are very bad. I will always stand by that, no matter which game I'm playing. Playtime inflation is stupid. The game should be good enough by itself. But if arbitrary nerfs couldn't get any worse, they also hit the flamethrower. This didn't just nerf that weapon, it ended up hurting every source of fire in the game. Then the next patch rolled around a few weeks later and tried to bring fire damage back slightly by fixing Psyker's magic mind fire that was also gutted in the flamethrower nerf somehow. So then the Garbs and Penances update came out, which brought in some brand new performance issues that made the game unplayable for me and a few others for roughly about a week. This really gave December vibes and was fixed by most people by playing a few games to rebuild the shader cache that got dumped. I had to personally install an experimental beta, and the clip in the background was from the launch day of that update that made even more people leave. Quality assurance with Darktide isn't exactly its strong suit. They also added a tier 3 power cycler to make the power sword less RNG and skins that you could grind through challenges. But nobody cared about these skins because the shirtless bug made every character the beefcake they were meant to be. They finally had a happy accident that everyone loved, and unfortunately they removed it a few weeks later. So now that you're caught up on what actually happened in the last 6 months, you can see how I personally felt about it and took it, and you can kind of see why they're trying to relaunch Darktide with Rejects Unite. I wish there was more to talk about the update, but it's just this. So since launch, we've received one playable map on December 15th, and this adds the second playable map, with a community event to unlock the third map after we hit 900,000 missions. This was lowered from 1.4 million for some reason that I don't know yet, but I'll probably update the pinned comment with some sort of stupid meme. But this update also adds cosmetic reskins as a gold dump and the chaos spawn that was promised at launch. Overall, it's a very mediocre update that not only misses the mark completely, but doesn't even begin to cover the core issues of Darktide. So trying to attract a new audience and get people to come back with this update is only going to exacerbate the current issues and make them even worse. I usually get asked what I think needs to be changed in Darktide, so my big three are going to start with the social tab. This has been broken since launch. You can't add friends basically at all, and sometimes it just doesn't even work in-game, and you're forced to add people through Steam ID if you actually want to play together. This turned into almost no sense of community inside of the game for the average player, and is just queue a mission, maybe see the same people again if you're lucky. The reason this is my number one most important thing to fix is because it's the first step of getting everyone together that still plays and trying to add some sort of sense of community so people aren't just playing for the gameplay loop and they're playing for each other. The second one's a lot more massive than the first one, but doesn't work without the first thing being fixed, and that's adding crossplay between Steam and Game Pass. There's no reason this shouldn't exist. The fact that there's still two separate servers for this blows my mind, and I'm sure someone could explain this to me in a way that makes sense, but why was it designed in this way in the first place? It's absurd to me. It'll never make sense why this was a decision at all, and it's overall just very stupid and needs to be fixed to consolidate everyone that's still with them. Then the final one is crafting. Locks just need to be removed. It doesn't fundamentally solve the core issues with crafting and obtaining perks and blessings, but it at least makes the system feel good to use and not be so FOMO or gacha-y, so if they nerf something, it's not as big of a deal, which adds a second point to either let blessings be purchasable from Mr. Milkers for weekly tokens, or every blessing is base unlocked at level 1, even the ones that only have a tier 4 like Bloodthirsty, and they can be upgraded through grinding penances, kind of like the contracted weapons they talked about long ago in that dev interview, but can still be obtained through the gacha lottery if you get lucky. It would create an end goal for everyone to work towards, and this was thought of by the stream when I did the 3-hour deep dive into Darktide's canceled features. But there's a lot more things that need to be fixed. These are just my top 3 for stabilizing the current player base so that it can start growing. And at this stage, most people would probably ask, why would you even play this disaster? And it really boils down to a couple of key factors. With Warhammer 40k being brought to life in a way I never thought it would be. The bolter I imagined when I was a kid works exactly the way I dreamed it would when I got into the game, and they hit the mark with almost every single weapon in Darktide. I don't think another company will ever do the bolter justice like Fat Shark did, and I think they have some of the most talented developers in the industry working on Darktide, and it really shows in the core gameplay, which is the main reason people want to play this game. Then when you add in the art and sound with all the attention to detail, it really starts bringing these dingy factory cities to life, with things like stage reloading reinforcing how immersive and fun they wanted the core gameplay to be. Darktide is built by a small amount of talented people, only to have it ruined by bad decisions to try and artificially inflate playtime. Games like Deep Rock Galactic and Left 4 Dead 2 in the same genre don't need to artificially inflate their playtime with gimmicks. In a sense, you will get your dollar to play hour ratio out of it if you look at it $1 to 1 hour. Most people get 30 to 50 hours before they quit, but that mark is usually where you are introduced to crafting in full force and how terrible it feels to do. And then people quit, sending Darktide off to the Steam graveyard, never to be seen again, or even worse, the Game Pass graveyard where they can't even play with anybody. So that's why at this stage of the game, unless you can go into it with an it is what it is attitude and completely ignore the crafting FOMO, I can't actually recommend Darktide to you. And it feels terrible to say that about one of my favorite games that I've ever played, but the reason is because I want the people that play Darktide in the future to feel rewarded and good about it so they can actually enjoy it with their friends, rather than just write it off as another dead gacha game to throw in the dumpster fire and never look at again. I really can't wait for the day I can make the video to actually recommend it to people, but the final review is that when Darktide is working correctly, it's an insanely fun to play game that can be extremely rewarding when you clutch up on the hardest difficulties. And if you go into it with the it is what it is mindset, you'll probably enjoy it, but it's not done cooking yet. So that's going to be all for now, and I hope you all have a great night.